Today we're receiving Liz Heisberg, who is Associate Researcher at the Center for International Higher Education at the Boston College. And we're going to talk with her a little bit about students, international mobility, teaching quality, and students assistantships, TA. And so I think I'll start making you a first question, then we can move on in a more informal way. The University of Campinas has two programs, sort of teaching assistant programs, one for undergraduates and one for graduate programs. And I think the main idea of these programs is to prepare students or graduate students and undergraduate students for future life as professors or teachers. The question that we frequently have in mind is how can we improve the didactical qualities of these students which are involved in these programs. And also, how do you see this issue connected with quality teaching? Can students improve quality teaching? Does a training early as in an undergraduate or graduate program help teaching quality of later professors or teachers? I think we should perhaps start with that.
Yes, it's a great question, and I think what's happening now in the discussion, in the debate, is that we're starting to think a little differently about the questions we're asking, because the tendency has always been to imitate what went before. So for student teacher, teaching assistants, for younger students to imitate how they learned. So we're repeating and trying to do what we did in the past as well as possible. The debate is changing because we're starting to wonder if what we did in the past is what we want to do in the future. So it changes a little the way we think about teaching, because we're starting to ask what students learn, how they learn, and if they're learning effectively. So we're moving to a slightly different discussion where instead of just having professors duplicate themselves in younger professors to do that kind of teaching well, they maybe change the dynamic, because we're beginning to find that when students learn only from the teacher, whether it's a teaching assistant who's very attentive, very dedicated, or a senior professor, there's a limit to their learning. And we're starting to see that perhaps we should be shifting the role of the professor, not away from somebody who gives knowledge to somebody who is facilitating a different kind of interaction between students and the professor. The professor takes a role stepping back to get students more actively engaged in addressing issues, talking to their peers, because when they talk to their peers, they learn from their peers, but they also have to defend their ideas to their peers, which causes a different kind of reflection and analysis on their part. So it stresses different skills, which tends to deepen the learning. So we're moving more towards considering the value of peer teaching, where the professor, it creates an environment where that takes place. So the professor has a very different role, but a very important one. But it's not standing in front of the room any longer and just speaking clearly, communicating well, organizing his or her material well, but really trying to create a different dynamic among the students in a classroom.
Okay. Are there any practical ideas of implementing that new pedagogy, let's call it, in terms of programs like workshops? So what are the ways to bring that change that you mentioned to actual classroom, to actual teaching and learning environment? So what are the new ideas that you are seeing around?
Great question, and I think right now this is so new that I don't know if there are programs to teach people the new pedagogy. The MIT and Harvard have both set up teaching labs where they're experimenting with this kind of teaching, and they have teaching assistants working with them, researchers working with them, looking at different ways of measuring learning, and really trying to, before they start teaching other people, to measure the effectiveness of these new ideas. And so it's really kind of it's an experiment that's still evolving quickly. There are other universities that are trying to encourage their teachers to think differently about teaching, but working internally. For example, another university in Boston that's very important is called Tufts University, and they have workshops during our summer when professors are not teaching regularly in the classroom, and they offer workshops to help professors think about how to effectively integrate new technologies, thinking about different kinds of pedagogies that they might experiment with in their classrooms. So they're kind of peer workshops for professors with other professors that are guided by people who have experience with technology or in the development of new curriculum in different disciplines. So it's an opportunity for professors to participate voluntarily in these summer workshops, to really have a space to reflect on what they're doing. I had a chance to interview some professors a few years ago who said that they come to the classroom and they just duplicate the way they learned. I mean, it's very natural to teach the way you were taught. But now people are questioning that model and wondering if, given that we're thinking about knowledge differently, given what's available to us in technology, with new technologies, should we be just duplicating the way we learned or thinking differently? And I think right now, I don't think anyone has developed a model that's defined yet. I think we're still in a period of experimentation. And I think there's more sharing. I think you're less alone today. I know that several universities have programs of mentoring. So in addition to just turning a teaching assistant loose in a room, or even a new professor, having a senior professor who has been recognized for excellence in teaching, then take the responsibility of mentoring, meeting with the professor, discussing the challenges of the classroom or problems that that professor may have with his or her students. The idea, I think, is to really create more discussion about teaching and new measurements for seeing how students are learning. And I think these experiences will see a shift in the teaching model at the university level in the future.
But let me change the subject completely to the issue of international mobility. I think the university is willing to increase the international mobility of the students. I'm not sure that it's clear for the students the benefits of having an experience abroad in another culture. Could you comment perhaps on that?
It's an interesting issue, and in the United States right now, more universities are moving towards making it a requirement without making it clear to the students why they have to go abroad at some point during their university career. And I think we haven't really defined that as well as we might. We see more and more in Europe. Bologna has made it possible for students to move much more easily. And I think people are in Europe, there's a context that says as Europe is integrating, it's important to know the different environments within Europe. So I think that it kind of fits to a larger strategy. Whereas a university, if you just say we want more students to come here or we want more students to go abroad, what is the larger context that gives some logic to this process? So I think it is difficult to encourage students. In some areas it's easy. Students who are studying art history, obviously you want to go to Florence and visit museums and study art. Yeah. If you're studying a language, of course you want to go to another country. But it's not so clear why someone in mathematics should go abroad, or why someone who's studying philosophy perhaps, or someone studying Brazilian literature, why would they need to go abroad? And I think that it's really important for us to have more orientation for students, more understanding, to help them develop more understanding about the world they'll be graduating into. And that going abroad is not that you'll learn mathematics differently if you study in France or if you study in Singapore. It's more that the experience of studying together with people who come from a different culture, a different kind of formation, will broaden the way you look at your own studies. People ask different questions, but also will broaden your personal experience, which is part of the development of your university career. It's not only developing knowledge in an area, it's developing yourself as a person, and it's a key element of that.
Going beyond the idea, it's better to know the world, but in terms of real developing the areas of knowledge, let's say, something like that.
I think the mobility of students fits perfectly with the discussion of liberal arts and general education. The discussion between universities or among educators today is shifting away from if you look at the requirements to get a degree, which in Latin America and I think Brazil as well as the rest of the region focuses very much on content areas, that to have a degree in physics or in medicine or in engineering, you have to cover a lot of specific areas of study. And it's really focused on knowledge content. We're in a world where new knowledge is appearing every single day. So the question is, should we be knowledge focused if a lot of that knowledge will be almost out of date by the time a student finishes their university career? So there's a new conversation taking place about competencies. We're giving students, instead of focusing completely on knowledge and content, the discussion is now on what kind of competencies. It's kind of a new word. I don't know if it exists really in Portuguese. In Spanish, it's kind of, people are starting to talk about it. But there's an emphasis on what kinds of skills should someone have so that they can adapt to new knowledge, new environments for working, new environments for interacting. And going abroad and studying in another country is part of the development of competencies, being able to communicate with people across cultures, being able to recognize where our cultural boundaries are, being able to collaborate with someone who maybe comes to a project with very different values as well as different background, educational background. So part of this experience of sending people abroad has to do with giving them competencies that will help them in their future career, just for interacting, for traveling, for collaborating, for being open to thinking differently about a problem, an issue. And then also the liberal arts are giving people, what they do in the end is they don't give people a lot of knowledge of one thing, but they tend to, the concept of liberal arts encourages a kind of critical thinking. It encourages the development of skills for future learning, for lifelong learning, for broadening somebody's areas of interest, also helping people to start to recognize the relationships between disciplines, the whole, an orientation towards interdisciplinary thinking, that it can be useful to a mathematician to study philosophy, or poetry even, and that these things, these new skills, this kind of stretching people's mental exercise, intellectual exercises somehow leads to more creative thinking, more open-minded approaches to learning, to research. So liberal arts is sort of being looked at, I think, because of kind of the competencies and qualities that it tends to develop. And the international mobility fits with that because it also helps to foster the development of certain attitudes, ideas, new thinking, the capacity to look at a problem from different points of view, which is so key in research and in a lot of areas. So I think this is just this shift of the model away from, and it has implications for how we teach. If we're not teaching knowledge, if we're not standing in front of the room to teach somebody certain theories that have been key and just focusing only on theories, we're talking about, okay, what skills should someone have in political science? What skills should people have if they're going to be a journalist? What skills should someone have if they're going to study law? They have to have a knowledge of the law, but they also have to have certain skills that they should be developing. So we're kind of broadening our definition of what a university education should be. And I think at this point there's a lot of debate and no clearly defined answers. We're still very much in the debate, but it's a very exciting time because we're really reflecting on what it is we do and looking at a very complicated world and trying to find a way to make use of this time that students have to develop themselves and think about what's the best use of that time.
Okay. I don't know if you had the chance to be at Unicamp or taking a look at our classes, but I think we are teaching really content-based, providing a content-based education. And I think we are a long way from a more general approach.
It's starting, and I think Unicamp is one of the very admirable aspects of this community. Is it's very outward-looking. Unicamp is very aware that it's connected to an international academic community. You have professors who have studied abroad, who participate actively in international research and publication, who travel to conferences, and I think Unicamp is very connected to this international debate and discussion, and I think it will bring change back to this university also.
Okay, thank you very much for your optimism and for the interview.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.